Ministers stand accused of promoting a law which in effect legalizes euthanasia. So-called living wills would allow people to decide in advance to refuse treatment if they became very ill. The government fights off a parliamentary rebellion, but the debate intensifies. Also tonight, the family of an Iraqi who died in British custody secure an independent inquiry. The BNP leader arrested and bailed on suspicion of inciting racial hatred. And praised to the skies, the British architect who's triumphed in France.
And in the northwest, a remarkable breakthrough in the treatment of CJD by scientists in the northwest. And how ruthless poachers may have wiped out an entire herd of deer, leaving some to die in agony.
Good evening. People's right to refuse medical treatment if they become seriously ill is the subject of intense controversy in Parliament tonight. Earlier today, ministers defeated a possible rebellion against the Mental Capacity Bill. This is the measure that's meant to clarify the law on so-called living wills, and it could allow people to decide in advance to refuse medical treatment if they became seriously ill. Opponents claim it will sanction a form of euthanasia and leave incapacitated people unable to change their minds. First tonight, our home editor Mark Easton reports.
The Commons today saw a debate, at times chaotic and bad-tempered, reflecting deeply held convictions about a basic human fear, that others will decide the manner of our death.
Let me come to new clause 1. What I need is... Order.
A law on what's called mental capacity has been talked about for 15 years, but right up to the last moment it was being amended. Not enough, though, to prevent a rebellion by 34 Labour MPs who voted against the new legislation.
Whilst the debate today has quite rightly centred around the very difficult issue of what happens to vulnerable people as they approach the end of their life, we ought not to forget that the entirety of this bill is about carers, parents, doctors.
One opposition amendment, which was rejected, proposed making it unlawful to withdraw food and fluids from a patient unless it could be shown that providing sustenance was itself unreasonably burdensome.
We should find in favour of life. That's the critical issue. Find in favour of life.
Passions run high because this is where most of us will die, in a hospital bed attached to tubes and machinery. Our deep fear is that in facing death, we lose control over how it happens. So the current debate is how the patient can have their best interests protected. Henry Gillard is 77 and has written a document, a so-called living will, making it clear what he wants to happen in the last days of his life.
It's letting the patient say, when they're healthy, like I am, I want so-and-so, I don't want this. And that means that the doctors and nurses don't have to make difficult clinical decisions.
The problem comes if the patient later changes their mind. Labour MP Claire Curtis-Thomas's mother had said she wanted to die if she suffered a second stroke. But when it happened, she communicated through blinking that she'd had second thoughts.
She said, yes, not only do I want to be fed, I want every other form of medical intervention going. And we went on to live 5 great years together.
Instead of a living will, a patient can nominate an advocate to reflect their wishes, normally a close friend or relative. But here, too, there are concerns.
There are circumstances that I've encountered, and I certainly know that colleagues have encountered, where it has been clear that the family has wanted somebody to die, and it's turned out to be something to do with money.
Most doctors welcome a law which helps clarify what patients want in specific circumstances, although some fear it may lead to legalised euthanasia.
If this legislation's enacted, it could put doctors under pressure to do things that they don't consider clinically appropriate by withholding food and fluids from patients.
The Catholic Church was also concerned that the new law would open the door for assisted suicide. It sought and won assurances from government.
As it stood, there was that real danger, and that was the gap that we said must be closed, because otherwise vulnerable people would be in great danger.
The bill was passed this evening with a large majority. The House of Lords must now reflect on these matters of life and death. Mark Easton, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's talk to Mark Mardell, who's in the central lobby of the Palace of Westminster tonight. Mark, can we just spell this out? This wasn't just an argument about the issues here, was it? That was very heated, of course. It was also an argument about the way the government's handled this.
Yes, frankly, it was a terrible mess. Labour MPs were already feeling irritable, a lot of them, because they thought they ought to be able to vote as their conscience dictated, but no, they said this was a party matter. They had to vote along government lines, so they were already feeling cross about that. And then they had this debate, already, as you say, very emotional, and then people started talking about a letter that was really important, a letter that had to be seen, a letter that was crucial. And this got them even more riled, because most of them didn't know what on earth anybody was going on about. And the minister, David Lammy, didn't really seem to know much about it, and the Deputy Speaker said, look, you must explain what this letter is. And he couldn't. Now, it turns out in the end it was from a very senior Roman Catholic Archbishop basically saying, as I think we heard in that clip there, that this bill was all right as far as they were concerned. Very helpful for the government. But the minister couldn't explain it. Now, his friends say that it would be wrong, unfair to regard this as a career-killing moment, because actually the letter was being written while he was already on his feet. But most people I speak to can't remember a ministerial performance that was quite so inept.
Just briefly, Mark, what are the prospects for this bill after this mess now?
It'll go down to the Lords, and those who are against it hope they will rip the heart out of it, destroy it completely. Downing Street, after the mess about fox hunting, are being a little cooler. They're saying that actually this is the sort of thing, the philosophical conundrum that the Lords are rather good at coping with, and they hope they will be able to crack it.
Mark, thank you very much. The family of an Iraqi civilian who died in British military custody has won its High Court battle for an independent inquiry. Baha Mousa's family alleges he was beaten to death after his arrest by British soldiers in Basra in September last year. The ruling means that in certain circumstances, the European Convention on Human Rights can apply to British troops in Iraq. Paul Adams has more details.
When British soldiers police the streets of a foreign land, what rules should govern their behaviour? And when a prisoner dies in custody, like hotel receptionist Baha Mousa, allegedly beaten to death by members of the Queen's Lancashire Regiment, does the Army's investigative process stand up to scrutiny? Questions addressed at the High Court today, judges ruling that in this particular case, the Ministry of Defence is on shaky ground. The judges are scathing. We are unable to accept that the investigation has been open or effective. They say there has been no public accountability. This death occurred not in the highways or byways of Iraq, but in a military prison under the control of British forces.
In future, they will know, and the government will know, and the Secretary of State for Defence will know, that the European Convention on Human Rights applies, and if people are tortured, then there has got to be a fully independent investigation.
Other Iraqis have died on the highways and byways of Iraq and even in their homes. Take Mohammed Dahesh, killed just over a year ago during a raid by British soldiers. Last March, his sister described to me the moment he was shot. But he did not die in custody. The judges ruled his case and 4 others are not covered by European legislation. The MOD welcomed this, saying the European Convention was never intended to cover the circumstances we face in Iraq, where the security situation does not permit deaths to be investigated in the same way as in peacetime Europe.
I personally look at the Geneva Convention as the primary law. If there are other laws that apply, well, let's have them explained properly, and let's be quite clear about that to the soldiers of our armed forces.
Both sides can claim a measure of victory in today's judgment. Human rights lawyers believe they've established an important precedent. The Ministry of Defence is confident that it's a precedent with a very limited application. Paul Adams, BBC News, at the High Court.
The Home Office has denied new claims in the Daily Mail that David Blunkett might have interfered in another visa application for his former lover's nanny, this time over a tourist visa to Austria. Officials said tonight that Mr. Blunkett was told about the problems over the visa, but said it was crystal clear that neither he nor his officials became involved. Nick Griffin, the leader of the British National Party, is tonight on police bail after being arrested on suspicion of incitement to commit racial hatred. He was questioned in connection with a documentary by the BBC about the extreme right. So far, 12 people have been arrested as part of the investigation by West Yorkshire Police, as Daniel Sanford now reports.
Nick Griffin emerged from Halifax Police Station in West Yorkshire this evening.
Have you been charged?
No.
The British National Party chairman, their leader no less, was arrested before dawn at his home in Wales on suspicion of incitement to commit racial hatred.
I'm going to be back here in March, bail till then. At that point, the idea is it's coming up to the general election, is to demonise us in our electoral chances. After it, the CPS know the charges against me won't stick. They're going to be dropped quietly after the election. This is an electoral scam to get the Muslim bloc vote back for the Labour Party.
Nick Griffin's arrest is linked to a BBC documentary in which he was secretly filmed by an undercover reporter who'd infiltrated the BNP in Yorkshire. Among other things, he's seen on camera making a speech to supporters describing Islam as a vicious, wicked faith. Nick Griffin has been chairman of the BNP since 1999. He's been trying to move the party into the political mainstream, and it has recently been more successful in local elections. In the next general election, he's planning to stand against David Blunkett in his Sheffield Brightside constituency. Today, West Yorkshire Police released this statement about their investigation. Since the broadcast, a team of officers has been working 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, viewing these videos in an attempt to establish if any criminal offences have been committed and recorded. A small crowd of supporters cheered Nick Griffin as he walked free on police bail tonight. 3 other men arrested in connection with the BBC film have been charged with racially aggravated harassment. Daniel Sandsford, BBC News.
Employers will have to allow staff to work until they're 65 under new laws to tackle age discrimination. The current system, which allows any retirement age to be set, will be illegal under new European Union rules. But ministers have accepted that firms can force people over 65 to take retirement, as our economics editor Evan Davis now explains.
Business Park, Britain. Among the workshops and offices of the country, retirement is becoming a hot topic. There's a European law compelling us to outlaw age discrimination and an ageing workforce.
We want to tackle this problem of age discrimination that is absolutely rife in too many workplaces. And in particular, we're announcing today that in future employers will not be able to force people to retire on grounds of age alone until they reach the age of 65.
This is all rather confusing because you probably thought we have a retirement age here already, but we don't. We have a state pension age when you get your pension. That isn't affected today. Retirement is actually left to you and your employer. Now, it's not the case that employees always want to retire as early as possible. Many times, the employer wants to retire them off, but they want to carry on working. The average man retires at 63, but the new plan is designed to give people the option to work a little longer. So this then is the idea. There'll be a new default retirement age of 65. You and your employer can agree anything you want, later or earlier, it's up to you. But if you don't agree, up to 65, he can't pension you off. If you want to carry on working, can't stop you just for your age. Over 65, that changes. Age discrimination of that kind is effectively allowed, although that's not how the government would put it. But over 65, you can ask to carry on working, and the employer